Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at DITA XML Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. DCL serves a broad client base spanning all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Howard Schatz of DCL and Patrick Bozek of DITA. Howard Schatz is DCL's SPL project manager and has been with DCL since 1991. Howard's active in SPL since development began in 2003. He's an active member of the SPL working group, which is composed of pharmaceutical companies and conversion vendors. He is a frequent contributor to the SPL working group's Wikis discussion forum and serves on the process communications, establishment, registration, drug listing, and OTC subteams. Howard has a BS in computer science from New York University, and prior to joining DCL, Howard was an account manager at EDS. And Patrick?
So hi, I'm Patrick Bozek. I'm one of the founding partners of Bozek LLC. We're the company that makes Easy DITA. I've been working in publishing, specifically structured documents in XML, basically my entire career, which is a little over 10 years now. So I think I actually probably should say 11, but it's okay. I have a really good understanding of how XML can be applied to business processes, how it can be really leveraged to help an organization at a business level as opposed to just from a technical perspective. At Easy DITA, what we focus on doing is implementing authoring and content management tools for XML, specifically DITA, hence our name, that is going to make the lives of our customers much more efficient and generally better when they're creating these forms of content.
Okay, okay, this is Howard speaking. And what I'm going to be talking about are best practices for pre-conversion authoring. The problems that we find when we're converting user manuals, patient instructions, and things of that sort over to the DITA environment. On this slide, I list all the items that we'll be covering, paragraph styles, character styles, writing tasks as an ordered list, not as a table. We'll be showing an example of that. Write admonitions as paragraphs of text, not tables. When you write a note, caution, warning, in terms of the conversion to DITA, we want to convert those as notes and cautions and warnings. But if we find them, if they're in the source file as a table, that can be problematic. Again, we'll have an example of that. When you're cross-referencing, you don't want to refer to page numbers. Page numbers, once you're in DITA, the page numbers are meaningless. You don't know what the environment will be used to look at the materials. But typically it'll be a digital environment, and what's a page at that point. Also, DITA has a self-imposed limit for tasks, for steps. Steps can only have 1 or 2 levels. After the third and lower level, if you've written it that way, if you've written the task to have more than 2 levels, then they have to become lists, and that may not be what you want. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so we want to use paragraphs styles for special paragraphs such as titles and captions. So if you have a section heading or a figure title, you want to use a style that immediately identifies what it is, that it's a style that you use only for figure titles or for section titles, and that'll serve as a map to DITA tagging. So again, you want to get the most bang for your buck in the conversion, and if you want to convert section titles, what you've called a section title, maybe in the DITA environment, you'll want those to be a task, or I should say a topic. In the DITA environment, a subtopic within the chapter, and you want to break that into a separate file for the purpose of content reuse. So it's important that the source file, it's very useful for conversion purposes if these unique styles are used to identify the paragraphs. And then you can say that a section title maps to a section tag and the title element within the section structure, and so on and so forth. Moving on to the next slide. We have the same issue with character styles, and this becomes especially important when you have bolded text or italicized text within a paragraph, within a command, for example. So you want to know, is that something that's a content type tag, such as UI control, which people use if they're using a computerized environment, and you want to say something that the user has to use by way of import. So again, using the character styles, and you've got that in whether it's Word, Framemaker, or InDesign, you've got different ways to indicate these unique styles that are to be used to map to DITA tagging. Next slide. Okay, now with tasks, it's especially important to have this as flowing text, or I say an ordered list. There are different ways in which you can write tasks, but basically the standard task is a series of what DITA calls commands. They have an action verb, check this, input that, things of that sort. So typically they're numbered as, when they're in an ordered list, it's just 1, 2, 3. If you have a case like we have on the screen here, where it says it's got a title, example 1 for this table, that says step action. So if you're going to break that table into a task, you have to identify the action verb, the command that's in there. So that seems to be in column 2, in the action column. However, if you look at the second step, it becomes problematic from a DITA standpoint, because what you're doing is you're giving them a command to check the direction of the rotation of the impeller, but then you're giving them an additional piece of information. If a dry installation is made, check the direction of rotation. In the DITA environment, that would best be tagged as in info. Within a step, you have the command or the action that you're supposed to take, and then after that you have additional information. So you want to tell them to check the direction of the rotation through the inlet elbow axis cover. So it's not really a formal step, but it's an instruction, a piece of information, and you want to do that. So anyway, getting back to this table, so now you've got, if you're going to convert this table, you then have to break it up. You then have to say, oh, if it's a table that has the heading of a 2-column table with step and action, then it's not really a table. Don't make it a table. We're going to make this a task, and then you give further instructions as to specifications as to how to convert that table and take the second column and what to do with it. It would be a lot easier, again, if this were an ordered list. Just a series of numbered paragraphs that would make it much more clear as to what is the, that this is a task. And with that, we can go to the next slide, which presents a more complicated table. And these examples that we're using have been taken from real-life conversions that we've done and issues that we've run into. So here it's a kind of funny task, and you undoubtedly want to reword it. But if in the if yes column, you have a series of steps. You could almost view that as a task in itself, but only if the alarm signal indicated on the control panel. So you might write it as a command to check alarm signal on the control panel, and then have a choice table if it yes or not. Again, can the second line, second row of that is can the pump be started manually. So in terms of being a DITA task, this is not really a DITA task. This is not written as a DITA task, but it would require considerable rewriting on the DITA side to make it one, or you can perhaps do it on the before conversion and make it look like a DITA task. Next slide, please. Okay, write admonitions, notes, cautions, warnings as paragraphs of text, not tables. So in the case of notes or cautions or warnings, it's not uncommon to find these tables where you have an icon that has something that's associated with warnings, something associated with notes, and so on and so forth. And then you have a second column that has the text. We've seen it even more so where they have one row is for something, and then the second row is for something, and again it becomes it's all in a table, and some of the rows are spanning columns. So the way it should look in DITA, I shouldn't say the way it should look in DITA, but if in the source document you simply have a paragraph that you've styled as a note, and then you have the actual text of the note, that would be much simpler to convert and make it a note or a caution or a warning or whatever it is that it should be in DITA. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so now when we're cross-referencing, you're trying to establish what you're cross-referencing to. So in the example that we have here, lost or forgotten password. What happens if you forgot the password? So browse the location of the private recovery key used for the project. See page 121 for information about creating a recovery key. Enter the password for the private part of the recovery. Enter and confirm. So you have this text, and the cross-references to page 121. So when we click to go to page 121, we come up with the next slide. And when we, so if you show the next slide, and here it has to set a recovery key. You can specify the key and click set recovery key, the key recovery key. So what exactly are you cross-referencing to? Presumably, you are cross-referencing to set a recovery key. In the case of DITA, that's probably a task title, and you might have an introductory. The context for that is this paragraph of you can specify the key, and then you break it up into the steps. Click set recovery key, select use recovery key, click browse for existing key, and so on and so forth. So if the task was, if you were linking to that, it would be much clearer as to, in other words, cross-referencing to the task itself. Once you've established the task and you have an ID for it, so then your ID is clicking on that. So it would be much clearer if that cross-reference wasn't simply to a page, but to a particular item on the page. And again, if that were a task title, maybe a section title, that would be much more imitation and greatly simplify the task of converting that material to DITA. Next slide, please. Okay, so here becomes a challenge, and this is when you're switching over to DITA, you should be aware of what your writing style was for the in the source files. So in the case of tasks, as I said, DITA allows one level or two levels in a task. You can have a subtask, sub-steps, but you can't go below that. So here, this is kind of an interesting situation. Again, this is the layout is the actual layout. The wording is different, but you start off with C instructions below, which isn't really a command, but we'll have to treat it as that. Install the hex coupler guard as follows, and then you have a series of steps. But now you're going to have these conditional steps for pumps with a motor saddle support bracket, for pumps without a motor saddle support bracket. But they were treating it for the client. These were a third level of steps, but you can't do a third level of steps, so you really have to ask, what is this going to be in DITA? So in the case of DITA, this would fall into the info category, and in the info category, you can have your list in there and put those things there, but they're no longer considered steps. You could make this a nested task. I mean, there are different ways of handling this in DITA, but again, so to make for a smoother conversion, it's helpful if you can look at your tasks and your other materials as well from a DITA perspective, and to simplify the conversion on the end. And that basically completes the presentation.
So I'm gonna jump in here now. Thank you, Howard.
Okay. So
now that we've taken a look at how we're going about this process, some of the things that we need to be looking at as we're going into this. I hope Howard was able to articulate to you that the things we're going to look at as we're moving into this this new world of structured XML and DITA content, these things are very possible, but they're also not trivial. So, taking it just a bit of a step back, I want to start off by talking about why we're going about doing this. What is the drivers that we see as we're moving down this road as a life sciences company. I think the first thing that we have to decide is where are the goals, and then even above that, what's really the vision. So one of the things you're going to notice as I go through my set of slides is that there's going to be about 7 slides that talk to different things that are commonly needed in life sciences companies, in medical device companies, pharma companies. And one of the takeaways from this is that it's very common when you start to look at these types of situations that things aren't totally broken. They're just maybe not optimal, maybe very not optimal, or they're very expensive. And those types of situations make it very difficult oftentimes to set really easily understood goals, goals that can be taken directly up to management. Sometimes it's harder to articulate exactly why we're going through a process if the value in it is dispersed over a large number of things. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, cost and the problems, the optimization of our process are hidden inside of all these little niches inside of the process. I think it's more effective to go and start to look at the vision around these things. So look at where we really are as an organization and decide where we really should be. Start to look at an overarching vision, a 24-month vision. Where would we like to be with our information development? And then we look at the things that come into this. So that's why we start with this documentation challenges slide here. We have complex documents very commonly in the life sciences. You'll have things that are SPL, Howard knows a lot about that. He's been involved with it ever since its inception. We have IFUs, more specifically in medical devices. Data sheets, these things, again, these are very common across a lot of different industries, but again, they can be complex and sometimes they can be very difficult to maintain. And oftentimes, more importantly, they're used in many locations. There's a large mixture of other things that will be involved here. So, one of the things that Howard took us through in his section of the presentation was how we're going to handle these different things like procedures and warnings and explanations and images. In the past, we've looked at these and we've said, okay, well, that's a list, or okay, make a table and put a light bulb in one of the parts of it. But that's not how it's going to work down the line, because now we have to be looking at how that's going to be impacted in multiple different places when we're outputting it. So we're going to be outputting to mobile devices, which are going to be utilized by people in hospitals, utilized by patients in hospitals. We're going to be output to traditional web publications, print almost definitely still. So many different locations, and you can't do those types of things which are just using tables and images in Word if you're going to have an effective publishing pipeline going out to these types of things. Getting into the type of people that we're interacting with, we have a very diverse base of people who are commonly involved. Because we're looking at life sciences, and this is, the documentation is often regulated. All the information coming out can be regulated. A lot of people have to be involved with the process of ensuring that it's correct. So one of the things that we very commonly see going into this is that these companies are coming from a very people-intensive process. So everything is done by people along the way. Things are passed along very manually. So something is sent in an email, things are recorded manually. Those might be stored in Word documents, meeting notes, just general review notes, those types of things. All of the layout is done manually. All the translation is done every single time manually. It's a very, very people-intensive process because that's safe. You can train people. When people get very good at one section of a process, it's very easy to go through and maintain a process which is so intensive for people. However, that's very expensive. That's something it's also often much slower than using software and technology and more modern processes to optimize some of those aspects of the process. So when you're going and looking at this, you have to really keep in mind all the different individuals who are going to be involved in moving into a new process for producing and distributing information. And so Howard can show you how he's going to be able to very easily bring to you beautiful structured content out of your legacy content, and EasyData can show you how it's going to be really easy to maintain and review those things. And those are very valuable aspects of this journey. But if you don't remember that there are a lot of people that are coming along this journey with you, and they have a lot of different backgrounds, it doesn't really matter what we provide to you as service providers, as technology providers, because the process portion of this, the people that are involved, they are really what's going to make or break a new implementation that's designed to optimize your information development and deployment. And getting into a little bit further into that, we look at these complex life cycles. So oftentimes there's a lot of review, again, getting back to the people who are involved, making sure that those things transfer over into your new environment very effectively, and then multiple outputs, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So now, as I said just a moment ago, I'm going to dive down into the set of different needs that we commonly see and talk about each one of them a little bit more specifically. So access for information. The single sourcing has been around for a long time. Enterprise-wide access to the information which is stored inside of these different repositories, inside of your source repositories, is huge. And even smaller life sciences companies, just like every other company around these days, is very likely to be a virtual company to a certain extent. So having web-based tools can make it much easier for globalized companies, companies that have a lot of home offices, make it much easier for them to interact, for them to do their pieces of it, without having to pull PDFs out of the system, without having to send Word documents across time zones. Having software, having a process that really manages that effectively can really pay off in terms of how quickly you can produce high-quality content. And then, of course, since we are talking about regulated industries, security is always a big aspect. So when you're going into one of these projects, you really need to get down and understand the type of security that you need. Some companies are going to be okay with your very standard levels of security. Looking at a system that's going to provide you HTTPS, which is just an encrypted way of interacting with websites. Also, the same protocols are used for interacting with web-based software, such as EasyData. Some companies are going to look at this and they're going to say, we really want to have this on premises or at least behind a VPN firewall. So these are both things that we work with very commonly. When we deploy onto a company's site, the IT organization manages a lot of the security, but sometimes they don't want to do that, and they'll come to us and say, let's look at how the VPN could set up, manage a VPN for us. And VPN is going to give you a really high level of security in terms of being able to access that content. There's no way we can go through a really deep dive on what's required there at this point in time, but I really encourage you to think about your security, think about what really is effective and what's required. And the counterbalance to that is that the more security you add, you always introduce a little bit of drag to the process. So it is a good idea to not overestimate what you need, but really take a good common sense look at what's going to be required there. The next thing we're going to look at is the ability to collaboratively author with each other. So this is getting back to those globalized teams. It's getting back to the idea that there's so many people in this process. So today, most companies that we see that are coming from life sciences, collaborative authoring to them is passing around Word documents, or maybe it's having Word documents set up in a Google Drive or a Box.net or maybe Dropbox or something like that. And to a certain extent, that is definitely a form of collaborative authoring. A lot of people consider Microsoft Word to be a sunk cost. But part of the problem there is that because there's no structure around these things, just the simple fact that as we're going through this process and I'm adding lists and somebody else is adding lists with different formatting, different bullet sizes, and we're trying to work on the same pieces of information, I'm copying things out of Howard's document, and Howard's copying things out of Adam's document, and we're duplicating information. Just because we can both get to the same content and it's stored someplace that's not on one of our hard drives doesn't mean that we're effectively collaborating. But on the other side, you can't jump over into really highly restrictive tools that are going to be really difficult for people to pick up. So what you need to do is you need to find a tool set that is going to work with the types of personalities and backgrounds that fit inside of your business, but still offer you the types of controls and process around creating this content that gets you to a point where you can effectively collaborate together, not just work on the same things. Those are, oftentimes it's called collaboration, just working on the same piece of content, but it really isn't collaboration. Collaboration is when you get to the point where your process allows you to effectively contribute and effectively work together to get to a good end result. One of the ways that we look at this oftentimes is the ability to templatize things. So being able to set up really standardized templates for things like IFUs, for SPL, for header information on documents, for all those different types of things, gives you the ability to confidently say that Howard is going to create the same type of information that Patrick's going to create. So you don't have to send a Word document created by Howard off to conversion or off to styling, and when you get the one back from me, I haven't gone in and screwed it up, because we're both using the same general structure that DITA is providing, and the templates are guiding us through that process of creating that content based on what we're looking to get out at that particular point in time. So once we've gone through the process of collaborating on these pieces of content, we have to assemble this content. We have to put it into something that can actually go out the door. So the idea that you have all of these pieces with DITA now, that you've gone through this process of taking and building a collaborative workflow that's allowing content to be created in the right ways, in the right structures by anyone in the organization, comes to a point where now you're picking up those structures and you're putting them together. This has the benefit of reducing duplication, ideally eliminating it. We've seen that. We've seen people achieve that type of a result where all content is single sourced, is single referenced. This should be increasing your accuracy and your consistency by doing this. And it means that you can get a lot more deliverables out of the same piece of content. So when you're looking at what are we actually going to produce, oftentimes today that's looked at as, okay, so we have an IFU or an SPL, and we need to go and put the content into the system and make sure we get to this end result. So that becomes a little bit less problematic because now you say, okay, we built this content, let's assemble it and let's publish it. We have consistent publishing pipelines, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides under multi-channel delivery. And we're able to reassemble these pieces of content into the high-value outputs. Maybe it turns out that in order to effectively sell a new blood dialysis machine, I'm not sure if this shows you how much medical information I have. I'm not completely sure that dialysis is for blood, but I know that dialysis machines are something you probably want to document. Maybe to sell the newest dialysis machine, you really need to show those data tables to the doctors in the hospital. So that means that not only are you building the documentation and the IFUs for that machine, but you need to put that same information in the hands of the salespeople. So now we're taking and we're using this modularity to pull this content into what is sell materials, what is marketing materials, and we can be sure that it's accurate. And when we're going and we're making these types of connections with end users who really care about accuracy, this is paramount to the sales process. So the single sourcing, the modularity, and the document assembly this allows us to have is not just a nice to have so we can reduce the friction on this process. It's also essential for really doing business the way that people expect to have business done today with these types of complex machines and drugs and other products that we're dealing with. Collaborative review, again, getting back to the people process, and we keep hitting on this item. We need to have the ability to really put these review processes through, again, in a structured way. We need to have all the information that surrounds these review processes. We can't have the notion of accepting a change in Microsoft Word and then just having that disappear. It's losing the audit trail. We can't send out PDF reviews. It's just too much work to manage. It's really taking and it's forcing a manual process on very high-value individuals. People who are managing technical publications, who are managing knowledge management systems, they shouldn't be coordinating PDFs being sent around to different individuals. They should be tracking these processes, and they should be stepping in and enabling these people to really look at the content and make sure that it's okay, make sure that it's going properly. So by moving into systems and processes that use newer technology, that use newer process, we're able to start to get away from what is essentially a paper paradigm. I mean, even though you're sending a PDF through an email and it's all electronic, it's still a paper paradigm. It's just like going over and dropping a paper with a highlighter on someone's desk. They're just going to mark it up and send it back to you. You're still rekeying. You still have to go and file that somewhere. It may be an electronic filing cabinet, but it's still not a good audit trail. It's still not a good process. It still can be error-prone from the rekeying. And it still doesn't have the same type of integration that we want to have with our general reporting down the line. So now we're getting back to the multi-channel delivery that I was talking about just a moment ago. So I think one of the things we see a lot that's interesting is, there's oftentimes there's a tomorrow deliverable. There's something that we have to get out tomorrow. So we're having such a hard time getting all of our stuff localized consistently into 25 different languages for our PDFs, and that's either a headache or it's just so expensive that the system isn't working the way that it's supposed to work. But the other thing that we see that I find to be even more interesting than solving that problem is this idea that we're not so sure what's next. Because we're moving into this new era where there are screens and there is information delivery everywhere, everybody's walking around with a cell phone. Patients are walking around with cell phones. Doctors are walking around with iPads. There is the ability to deliver content and information, and the things that we need are different customers and customers of customers to have to make intelligent decisions that just weren't there, and we're not exactly sure how we're going to use all of them yet. So the idea that we're able to put our content into an open standards format, DITA in this case, that is going to be ready for those new applications, for the new methods of delivery, for the new methods of integration, for putting these things in the places that really, really matter, and giving the right quantities of information to the right people is huge. And not having to make that decision today is huge. Because when you're going through the process of changing your organization over from using Microsoft Word, which is just so ingrained and so well understood, into this process which is much more structured, much more consistent, but using some new tools that require a little bit of a learning curve, you don't want to be going through a process of also taking and trying to completely rewrite the rules around how you're delivering that information. So being able to confidently say that the decisions we're making today on our process and our tools and our format, our DITA XML content, are going to serve our output needs in the future it's huge. It's just massive. It's saying I'm not going to be tied down to what I can get out of Microsoft Word or what I can get out of something like Madcap Flare or what I can get out of some other non-structured or less structured tool that's governed by the vendor, the person who creates that tool. This is now putting the power in the hands of the community and in the hands of the company, which is a completely night and day difference between where most people are coming from. And on a larger scale, this gets back to that whole idea of vision. So you can go and you can communicate vision, and you don't have to fill all the pieces in today, because I think, as we all know, everyone who's run a fairly complex change management process, you want to have goals. You want to have certain things you're going to hit in 3 months, certain things you're going to hit in 6 months. But the reality is that things happen along the way. And if you're judging the project based specifically on the goals that you're going to be hitting on those milestones, as opposed to this larger vision, it can become so much more stressful, and it can be so much less productive. When you look at it from this perspective, saying it's future-proof, this will support our types of delivery that we want. This is the right way of doing it. This process will be better. These are the things we're going to do in the short term. These are the long-term vision aspects of this. It's going to create a better, healthier, more productive change process throughout the organization, or at least that's what we find. So next we're getting to the localization one. This is a really highly functional slide. It's a second to last need we have here, and I think everybody knows what this is. We're selling globally. Every company has to sell globally. It doesn't matter how big you are. If you want to be a part of the economy in this century, it's a part of being a global retailer, whether or not you're a 5-person startup and you're looking to do this in the next 12 months, or you're a $2.5 billion NASDAQ or Dow listed company. You have to be able to sell globally, and when you're dealing with things that are life and death, like you do in life sciences, that means your content needs to go globally with you as well. So I would guess that most people on this call who are looking at this are probably already doing localization. I would just also guess that it's probably way too expensive, that it's costing a lot more than it should. When you move to a modular open standards format, localization can be much smoother. It can be much more adaptive to your process. It can be much easier to manage, and most of all, it can be so much less expensive. Localization savings, that's where your hard ROI is. If you're going to more than 2 or 3 languages, you will almost definitely see less than a 12-month ROI on a move to a structured platform, a structured process, just from localization. Everything else included, you'll see a lot of soft benefits. You'll see a lot of improvements in efficiency. You'll probably see a lot of organizational benefits. You'll see some smaller hard ROIs for dollar values that roll up into your total case. But if you're really looking for that big number that's going to be on your ROI, it's in localization. That's our experience. That's where it is. So finally, we're going to come back around to something that's really close to the first point, which is the notion of findability and usability. So our first point was access to information, and that was kind of talking about the internal aspect of it. It was talking about the authoring and the review teams being able to find and interact with content, the single sourcing ideas there. And I want to bring it all the way full circle back to bringing it more to the customer's perspective, the customer's perspective, the ability to really find this information. When you break your content down, when you put it into a semantic format, you're making choices that allow this content to be more distinguishable, which means it's more searchable. When you know what's inside of these pieces, when these pieces are smaller and therefore more targeted specifically at a particular procedure, a particular warning, a particular idea, an explanation of what something is, those types of things, you're able to deliver that more effectively. That information can be more targeted. It means that it's something that can be searched more effectively, delivered more effectively, and understood more quickly. So it really does create value right at the customer. When someone pulls something up on their cell phone that's looking at your latest dialysis machine and they want to know what is the right amount of time to be sitting here hooked up to this thing? If I'm feeling a little bit of a cold pinch, what does that feel like? Those types of aspects. That could be a doctor looking that up. That could be a patient looking that up. And instead of having to go and search through a manual that a doctor doesn't have time for and a patient isn't going to understand, you can deliver just that piece of information that's really going to make a difference to that person. And you can do that because you can find it and because it's already sectioned out logically to put it in front of them, put it on their device. So that wraps up my portion of this presentation. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I tend to do that sometimes. So I think we're going into a questions and answers section here. So I guess I'm handing it back over to you, Adam.
Yes, and thank you, Patrick and Howard, for a very informative webinar. We've had several questions already come in, so let me get them going. And the first question is, what is the cutoff point for a company or department to move to DITA? Whether volume of documentation, corporate revenue, headcount of department, translation needs, or other criteria?
So I can jump on that one. And if you have anything to add, Howard, I would really love to hear your follow-up. I don't think there's necessarily a hard cutoff. I think it really comes down to needs and capabilities. And I know that's a little bit of a cop-out in terms of an answer, so let me justify that. When you're looking at a company which is large and has a lot of content and has a lot of products in the market and is doing a lot of localization, the ROI is simple. It's so drop-dead easy. You basically just go and call up a good consultant and you say, here's our situation, and they can hand you an ROI that may not be exact, but it's pretty close. And when you come back down off that to a smaller organization, I think a lot of times it's more about being larger, acting larger than you really are. So the difference in what you're looking at there is instead of having a hard ROI, you're looking at a capability. And what you're looking to do is get yourself into a healthy production process before you get too big. So it doesn't have to become what is a return? Is it getting a 12-month return? Are we getting a 6-month return? Whatever it is, when you get larger and you have more content and you're selling more, and then it becomes a problem that you're solving as opposed to a capability you're building into your business from day one. So I really think that that's the right way to look at it when you're smaller. There are definitely tools out there that will make it affordable for you, that can make it something that's really, that is available at that level. And a little bit of an investment up front, I think, pays huge dividends throughout the course of the growth and the lifespan of an organization which is just starting out, just getting bigger, just coming into the market.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. I think that summarizes well.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick. The next question has come in is it better to clean up source text by making it structured before the conversion to DITA or after the conversion?
Yeah, I think I'll field that one. And that, yeah, yeah, that becomes a question of your capabilities and your resources. If it comes in as really bad DITA, if you're instructions, your documentation on your devices and machines were not really written with DITA in mind, and we're taking a more fixed type of approach with this, that doesn't lend itself well to DITA. Probably, and your editorial staff is very familiar with their in-house system, then it probably makes sense to do the cleanup beforehand and start reworking it. If it's close, then I would say you'd be better off getting it converted to DITA now and cleaning it up after the fact. And it's also a matter of how pressing is the need to go to multiple platforms. If the need is great, you might just want to get into DITA and work with it as best you can. That it can still be in, quote, the DITA environment. It may not be the ideal way that DITA tasks should be written, for example, but at least it's already in DITA, and you can then have the flexibility that Patrick was talking about for different platforms and start going to different platforms. And to be honest with you, nowadays, new platforms are opening up just about every day, it seems. So you want to be able to have that flexibility.
Okay, Patrick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a very accurate representation.
Okay, thank you. Howard, this question was asked during the end of your slides, and the question is, so from your slide, it's suggested not to use icons without admonitions. We have our DITA template with a table and icon for our admonitions. These were in our legacy documents.
Right. Yeah. So if they're there as a table, it's not a high priority item to clean up. I mean, it can be handled fairly easily. But if you don't have many admonitions, it's a question of the volume. So if you have a lot of those, I think you just want to convert them as is, and it'll be dealt with in the conversion. But if you don't have that many of them, it may make sense just to make them text. I think you really want to look at the overall presentation of those admonitions as to how they're done to determine to make an assessment if those are DITA type notes. It's just that in my experience, I've seen so many different ways of handling things. I don't want to give a blanket answer. But if it's just an icon and wording, you're probably okay to leave it as is.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
The next question is, I hear a lot about writer team pushback against DITA. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, Patrick, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I'll jump on that one. So, I think one of the major issues that people run into when they start this change management process is that they look at it from a technology perspective, and the goal is going to DITA. And I think that's the wrong way of going about it, which may surprise you since DITA is in the name of our product. The right way to look at this is that as a team, we are going to do something that makes us better. And when it's framed that way, I think people have a much harder time pushing back against it because DITA is just a component of what you're doing. So the way that I like to present it, and I don't always have the option of presenting it because, it's rare that we're the consulting aspect of the project, and by rare I mean basically never. But the way I like to present it when I'm given the option is, hey, look, this is what we're doing today. This is why we feel that we need to move forward. We feel that it's taking us several weeks too long to get our publications out because there's a major aspect of localization and desktop publishing at the end of that. It's also really expensive for the company, which means that they're devoting a lot of resources to what we do that aren't going to us. They're going to a third-party vendor that isn't benefiting our team. It's not making our team look better. It's not really improving what we're doing as a publications department. And inevitably, that reflects on the publications department. It reflects on the value of the publications department. So when these organizations look at this, if you start by saying, okay, it's 2015, almost, we need a process which is better to make us better. Here are the components. Oh, by the way, it's partially DITA. I see that a lot more successful than we need to go to DITA. Because what does that even mean? Why are we going to DITA? Well, then you have to have that whole why conversation as opposed to what I was saying earlier, which is the vision. The vision is, as a publications department, we can do better. We can be faster. We can be more efficient. We can take those resources that are going to desktop publishing at some translation agency and bring those back into our organization to produce better content, to get us better mobile outputs, to improve the things that we're doing for our internal customers, to show sales that we're a valuable portion of what they do. I mean, obviously, I could ramble on about this all day, but I think you get what I'm saying. I think it's how you frame what you're doing and how you're going about it.
Yeah, and I have to second what Patrick said. It's not that you're going to do it. It's that you're going to a platform that will be so beneficial going forward. And that's what you want to do, and writers would just need to understand. If they understand that, then I think there'll be a lot less resistance.
Great, thank you. The next question has come in is it possible to use Flare or Framemaker as an intermediary to get content ready for DITA and output to DITA for input into your CCMS?
I've got an answer to that, but I think I might let you go first there, Howard.
Yeah, you can, but it's a rather expensive proposition to do that. Again, Frame was an early supporter of XML in general and the DocBook and of DITA. But as an interface, it's a rather expensive way. But again, it becomes, well, what if you're using Frame already, and that's why you want to use Frame? It may make sense to do that.
Yeah. So I'm just going to second that. If you have Frame, and you like Frame, so I mean those are the two things there, have and like. If you have Frame and you like it, I don't see a good reason to throw it out. I think that especially if you're engaging someone like DCL who knows how to bring your unstructured frame through to structured frame, preferably DITA, that can be a really comfortable way of going about this, and it can even be a way that's what you do in the future. So keep using Frame. EasyDITA has a Framemaker connector. It allows your people who've been using Frame, your tools specialists, technical publication writers, to continue to use Frame and still get the value out of the CCMS and the contribution and the review and those types of things that you get from a platform like EasyDITA. More specifically on the Madcap Flare point, Madcap Flare will tell you that they export to DITA. As we're on a webinar, so I'm not going to directly tell you that's not true, but I think you probably would have to end up working with DCL after the fact for sure to really get to where you want it to go. So if you're in Frame, yeah, I think there's no good reason to throw it out. I wouldn't view Madcap Flare as a stepping stone to a truly semantic XML process. It's a good help tool. It's a good hat tool. If you're just looking to produce help output, that's it's not bad for that.
Okay, great. Next question, it's a little bit long, so please bear with me. And the question is, DITA is very complex after implementation due to the nature of reuse and cross-references to content in a complex web taxonomy. What DITA reuse strategies and cross-referencing techniques will help to reduce rather than increase this complexity as the taxonomy grows?
Well, I think the key word there is strategy. So it's very common that we see people who don't have strategies around this. So they get that nice button that lets them conref content, and they just go nuts with it. And in some cases that works out okay, but generally not so much. If you have a strategy that really talks your people through how this is done, how these things are laid out, we find that's a lot more successful. What the actual strategy is for each individual business, it's too general to make a blanket statement on that. We've seen people make very effective reuse of the basic conref mechanism. So they set up warehouse files, and those warehouse files are where 60% of their content resides, and the way that they go about building their publications is they conref large pieces of it out of those warehouse files into the publications as they're going through them. And they have a process of identifying, kind of a litmus test for when they should be searching in warehouse files versus when they should be authoring. And that gets back to the people process aspect of things. It really comes down to sitting down together and deciding what the mental workflow is around reusing content. The other side, the more advanced side, is obviously using something like a key referencing strategy, or as they would be known in some other tools, variables. These can be extremely powerful strategies, but getting the process for those right is also very important. So you have to sit down and understand how your tool interacts with that. So you work with your vendor, you work with your consultant, you work with the people who understand your content, and you work with the major stakeholders in your organization to design the methodology in which these are going to be implemented. And I think you'll find that once it's been written down, once it's been outlined, that the scariness of it, the complexity that's the boogeyman aspect of it, it goes away, especially once it's been used a little bit. So I'm not going to say by any means that there's not a lot of complexity there, but I think it really is up to each individual company to take and manage that complexity and turn it into something which is whittled down into being just what they use, and thereby not a massive complex process anymore. So a very long answer to your longer question.
But a very good answer. Long but good.
Howard, do you have anything to add to that answer?
No, the main thing is the strategy imposed. But to give you an example, one of our war stories here is we have a product called Content Harmonizer, which will review all of your materials and find where paragraphs are essentially the same or exactly the same. So identify for you the paragraphs. And in one particular case, I think it was in a military application, they found the same warning was appearing in 26 different manuals, and it was always exactly the same, except in the 26th manual, the word not was missing, and it was critical for that warning that you needed the word not there. So it was a very big oops moment for the people involved in that one when they saw that that particular manual was missing the word not in a critical piece. So, but it is important. So if you can, it's not just identifying it, but having, as Patrick was describing, the process for being able to reuse the materials.
Thank you. Last question, gentlemen. Here it goes. What can you do to get writers ready to write in DITA even before conversion to DITA? What can you do to make it easier to wean them away from formatting?
That is a $1,000,000 question, isn't it? I think, again, it really comes back to having them understand the value in what they're doing. I think the leadership aspect of bringing people into this, because you can't wean people off formatting, right? I mean, it's not going to happen. People naturally like to format things, and it's a cliff. I mean, it is. You're jumping off of the formatting cliff into the land of no formatting. And from this perspective, I don't think there is a way of kind of gently doing this. I think it is a Band-Aid that you rip off. But I think as long as people understand why that's happening, and they understand that as a part of their group, that going this direction and making this change is benefiting them, it's benefiting the publications group, and it's benefiting the company as a whole and how they fit into that paradigm, I think that it makes that worthwhile. And I think that instead of pushing back because they like formatting, I think that it's something where they can say, okay, I get why I'm learning something new. I get why I'm doing this. I'm comfortable with that. And now it's an opportunity to get better at authoring in an environment where there isn't formatting as opposed to a situation where they're losing their formatting.
Yeah, on that I have nothing to add. I mean, that's basically it. You just got to do what you got to do.
Okay, well,
yeah, I was just going to add that in the SP, for those who are familiar with SPL, I mean, that becomes a major issue because the FDA is the one controlling. We're not talking DITA, right, when we're talking SPL, but we're talking XML and style sheets. And in the SPL world, the rendering in SPL is dictated by the FDA style sheet. What the printed label package insert looks like is controlled by the client, but subject to federal regulations. But the rendering in SPL on the daily med, it's out of their hands, and they just have to recognize that it's out of their hands. But it's for the better good.
Okay, well, thank you, Howard and Patrick. This has definitely been informative questions and answers period. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast, and you'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar in the archive section of our website, which is www.dclab.com. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, November 4th at 1 p.m., titled Moving Up the Knowledge Value Chain, being presented by Joe Gallup, founder and president of Suite Solutions, and Miriam Brand, Marketing Communications Manager at Suite Solutions. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.